Morning all, Brian S. Pratt here. I'm going to read chapter 9 of Fires of Prophecy, book 2 of the Morcyth Saga. So Jerome had just headed back to Mountainside to either retrieve or destroy James's backpacks, which supposedly has incriminating notes about magic. Don't want the Empire to know that he's the mage. Of course, we followed Jerome back there. He's now captured. Yay. And now we're back to James and the crew. The following morning, when James woke, his first thought was on Jerome. He feared for his safety, but knew retrieving the backpack and the letters it held was important. Getting up, he went to the small pond that had developed overnight. A small stream carried the excess water off into the desert. It didn't get far before being reabsorbed back into the ground. He played with the water absent-mindedly with his stick, first creating breaches that altered the water's course and damming them up again. One by one, the others woke. Rations were readied and grain fed to the horses. "Wonder how Jerome's doing?" Cassie asked. That question was uppermost in everyone's mind. "I'm sure he'll be all right," Tanuk assured her. Looking to the pond, he said, "Pretty impressive." "Yes, it is," agreed James with satisfaction and pride. He created a new oasis here in this desolate land. After everyone finished eating, they put the horses into their harnesses. Tanuk filled all the water bottles from the newly formed pond. By the time the sun had completely topped the horizon, all was ready, and they headed down the road. This time Tanuk rode point while James drove the lead wagon, with Delia and Cassie bringing up the rear with the other. They traveled for 2 hours before a green oasis with several palm-type trees and bushes surrounding it came into view. A small town had grown in the vicinity, and from the apparent age of some of the buildings, it must have been there for a very long time. As they drew closer, they saw a large gathering of people at the edge of the oasis. It soon became apparent that all was not well. People were agitated, some crying and wailing. The group by the oasis had their attention focused on a man in robes speaking animatedly. As they pulled closer, James asked someone what was going on, but no one understood him. They spoke, after all, they did speak the Empire's language. "Something's obviously got them upset," Dilly commented. "Wonder what," he replied as he watched those gathered by the oasis. I thought about having everyone just speak the same language because a lot of books do that, but that didn't seem logical to me. So, though it's a little bit irritating and it causes me extra work, they speak different languages. Tanuk brought his horse next to them and said, "That guy they're listening to seems to be some kind of priest or leader or something." "I think you're right," agreed James. As they entered the town, a man came out of a store and stopped when he saw them. Gesturing animatedly, he tried to tell them something. "We don't understand what you're saying," James explained. The man paused a moment and they continued in their tongue. "You must leave this place." "Why?" "We are cursed," the man said tragically. "We have lost the favor of the gods and bad things are happening." "What do you mean?" "At first we thought nothing about it," the man explained. One of Osran's ewes went dry and several people took sick. We thought they were normal occurrences. Those things happen from time to time. Then last night our oasis, the oasis that has sustained our people for 100 generations, went dry. James felt a shiver up his spine as he remembered tapping the underground water the day before. Zalim, one of our town leaders, has sought the counsel of our clerics, but they say the gods are not doing this, that we have not displeased them. He stood there, wringing his hands as he continued. But most of our people feel an atonement of some sort will bring back the water. I fear what they may do. "James," Tanuk started to say, when James shushed him quickly, shaking his head, indicating he should say nothing. "I must go," the man said. "Please leave before anything should befall you." With that, he turned and hurried to where the people gathered by the oasis. When they were once more left alone in the street, Tanuk asked James, "Did you do this?" Nodding miserably, he replied, "Most likely." Feeling ashamed for the pride he had felt earlier at his accomplishments, he looked at the people whose lives he had ruined. "Can we do anything to help these people?" Julie asked from her wagon. "I wouldn't even know how to fix this," admitted James. "This is what happens when you use magic on the natural order. People suffer. Trying to quench our thirst, I have inadvertently destroyed this village and hundreds of lives. We weren't even that bad off. Had we simply continued another few hours, we could have come to this town and had plenty of water. And had plenty of water. And had plenty of water? Plenty of water. No one would have been hurt. Okay. I think this scene here came from when, back in the old Dungeons & Dragons cartoons, when Eric was Dungeon Master, he brought water to quench his thirst, and Dungeon Master went and pushed it back down. And he says, if you bring water to quench your thirst here, you may turn farmland to desert elsewhere. And that always stuck with me, and I think that's where this came from. Don't blame yourself, Judith said, trying to console him. You didn't know this would happen. That's right, added Cassie. You were trying to do what you believed was right. They may discover the water down the road and move their town there, suggested Tanuk. Maybe, said James, not feeling any better about the situation. From near their voices, James suddenly heard a woman's wail, while at the same time several others began shouting. Jumping from the wagon, he ran over to see what was happening. James, Dealey shouted, come back! But he paid her no heed as he continued on toward the oasis. Delia hopped down from the wagon, and then she and Tanuk followed him. Cassie remained with the wagons. As he drew near, he saw the same man still addressing the people. On the ground in front of the speaker knelt another man whose hands were tied behind his back. A woman at the front of the crowd looked to be crying and pleading as she attempted to go to his side. Two men held her arms tightly to prevent her from reaching the bound man. Seeing the person he had talked to earlier, James worked his way through the crowd to his side. What's going on? Glancing ahead at who addressed him, the man said, Roland, indicating the man being held, is going to be sacrificed to the gods come sunset. Why? James cried incredulously. To appease them, the man explained. He's an outsider that came to live with us a year ago. He took a wife, he said as he indicated the wailing woman, and now has a son. It's all very sad. Why are they sacrificing him? He asked. Looking over his shoulder, he saw Tanuk and Delia thread their way through the crowd toward him. Because he is odd, the man said, always had strange notions and made the weirdest things you ever saw. When the oasis went dry, people talked and came to the conclusion that a lot of unusual things have happened since his coming. They believe his presence among us has angered one of the gods, and his sacrifice will bring back the water. What do your clerics say? James asked. They say it will make little difference, that the gods aren't angry, he explained, but the people are scared. They must do something. The speaker continued talking, and James watched the crowd as they hung on to every word. Hassan, the man said, pointing to the speaker, had been the one convincing everyone to sacrifice Roland. He leaned closer and quietly said, There's been little love lost between those two. I see, James said, understanding coming to him. The people here, he said, gesturing to those around him, are really a quiet, peaceful lot, but they are scared and need an outlet for their fear. I'm afraid Roland will be that outlet. James saw a tear roll down his cheek. James remained there a moment as he looked first at Roland, then his wife, who was beside herself with grief. He came to a decision. Thank you for explaining things to me. You're welcome. Turning, James headed back toward the wagon just as Tanuk and Delia reached his side. Moving to follow, they asked him what was going on, but he waited until they were back at the wagons. They're going to sacrifice that man for something I did. I cannot allow that to happen. What are you going to do? Delia asked. They plan to kill him at sunset. I mean to stop it. I can't let his death be on my hands. How? Asked Tanuk as he mounted his horse. Let's continue down the road a ways, James said as he took his seat on the wagon. Then I'll tell you. With a flick of the reins, he got the wagon rolling, and they were soon beyond the town and headed south. A mile out of town, James called a halt, and everyone gathered around him once more. I plan for us to travel until just before sunset. Then I'll return on horseback and rescue him while you make camp for the night. I'm coming too, Tanuk said. You need to stay with the girls, James replied, in case there are bandits or something. I'm sure we're going to be all right, Delia said. Besides, we need you to return. We should be okay here for a few hours. All right, James agreed. I could definitely use the help. Grinning, Tanakh said, better than just riding guard on a bunch of wagons. Flicking the reins to get the horses moving once more, he said, we'll see. For the next several hours, they rolled down the road until the sun began its ascent to the horizon. When the shadows grew long, they pulled off the road. While the girls set about making camp, James saddled one of the spare horses. With a quick goodbye, he and Tanakh were off as they raced back toward the oasis. They reached the outskirts just as the sun neared the horizon. The town was eerily quiet as they passed the first couple of buildings. At the oasis, they found the entire town assembled to watch Roland's sacrifice. They tied their horses at the inn at the edge of town and walked the remainder of the way to the oasis. They saw Hassan in front of the crowd, and his voice could be heard loudly and clearly as he spoke to the people. Though they were unable to understand what was said, the meaning was unmistakable as two men led Roland to stand before Hassan. The crowd quieted as they made him kneel before Hassan. James looked for the woman who had been making the scene earlier, but she was nowhere to be found. They must have removed her so she wouldn't spoil the proceedings. James whispered to Tanakh, make your way as close to the front as you can. I'll create a distraction and you get him out of there. As Tanakh nodded and started to work his way closer to Roland, James grabbed him by the arm. Don't kill anyone. Tanakh winked at him as he pulled away and made his way through the throng. James skirted the edge of the crowd until he neared the now dry oasis. Looking to Hassan, he saw him draw a long knife and approach Roland. Holding the knife high, he began speaking loudly to the gathered people. James began to concentrate. 1 second. Throat's getting parched. Now, with the spilling of the cursed one's blood, our gods will be appeased and life will flow back into our oasis. Hassan, exuberant and ecstatic, raised the knife high. Every eye was upon him. Suddenly, the mood of the crowd altered and they began to murmur. He looked to them and saw that their eyes were no longer on him, but looked at something behind him. Irritated at being interrupted in his moment of retribution on the man who had wronged him so grievously, he turned to see what they were looking at, and his eyes grew wide at what he saw. Lights, many lights, glowed above the oasis. Pulsating, they moved in an erratic pattern as if they danced to the beat of an unheard I think I'm going to say now dry already. Now. Hang on. Now dry oasis. There you go. Lights, many lights glowed above the now dry oasis. Pulsating, they moved in an intricate pattern as they danced to the beat of unheard music. Tanakh stood transfixed by the dancing lights. He glanced at James and found his eyes closed. Knowing this was his friend's work, he edged closer to Roland. Murmuring above the crowd grew and the beautiful pattern of lights continued. As they swirled, the pattern tightened as their dance brought them closer and closer together. The lights pulsated brightly once, then they turned a darker, foreboding color. Suddenly, there was a brilliant flash as all the lights came together, and where many lights had once been, only one remained. This one, a dark sphere that pulsated a deep purplish glow. Tanakh heard the crowd's murmur the crowd's murmur of wonder changed to one of fear and uncertainty. He shoved his way to the front, now only feet from where Roland knelt. Hassan had turned toward the sphere, intent on what it was doing. The two men guarding Roland had also turned to watch, Roland momentarily forgotten. Glancing, he saw James staring at him, then saw his head nod before his eyes closed once more. This was it, he thought to himself. Suddenly, the sphere transformed, bulging outward and changing shape. Those in the crowd gasped. He ran the few feet to Roland and quickly severed the bonds with his knife. Roland looked at him, fear in his eyes. Come with me if you want to live. Okay, Terminator, right? Tanakh whispered. With sudden understanding that death might not come for him this evening, he nodded and quickly got to his feet. At the oasis, the sphere had formed into the shape of a humanoid creature with glowing red eyes and two foot-long horn sprouting from his forehead. The crowd shouted in fear as panic erupted. All thought of Roland's sacrifice was abandoned as the people fled from the area. Hassin turned at just that moment and saw Tennock helping Roland to his feet. He shouted, but was unable to be heard over the cries from the crowd. He advanced on Roland with the long knife, intent on killing him. Tennock saw him advancing and easily deflected the long knife with one of his own. Remembering what James had said, he struck with the blunt end of his knife and connected with Hassin's temple, dropping him to the ground. The two men that had brought Roland remained oblivious to what was happening as they continued to watch the creature take shape. "Let's go," he shouted to Roland as he grabbed his shirt and thrust him towards James. He looked over his shoulder at the now fully formed vision of hell that stalked from the oasis toward the panic-stricken people. Those who had yet to flee shrieked and raced into town. "You're good, James." They reached James, whose legs had grown weak from magical exertion. "Help me," Tennock said, and together with Roland, each took one of James's arms across his shoulders. They hurried through town toward where the horses had been left. They practically carried James as he still worked to maintain the hellish vision. Throughout the town, people screamed and raced back to their homes, slamming and barring their doors. Others just raced out into the desert as fast as their legs could carry them. When they reached the horses, Roland said, "I don't know how to thank you." James opened his eyes just as a flash of fire came from the creature and then it slowly disappeared. "We've got to get you out of here," he said to Roland. "I can't leave," Roland said, "not without my wife and child." "But they'll try to sacrifice you again if you remain," Tennock exclaimed. Then he saw the determination in Roland's eyes. "Do you have a horse?" James asked. "Yes, I do," he replied. Turning to Tennock, he said, "Go with him and get his family, then meet me back here." He gave James a nod, then turned to Roland. "Lead the way." Roland hurried down the street, followed closely by Tennock. They left James behind as they turned down another street, making quick speed through the darkened town. He went past several more houses and then turned down one more side street, stopping in front of the third house. Light from a single candle came through an opened window, and voices were heard coming from within. They peered through the window and saw his wife sitting in a chair surrounded by three men, one of whom was Hassin. He yelled at her, gesticulating wildly with his hands, obviously demanding to know the location of Roland. She sat there crying, not saying anything. From the other room came the baby's cries, matching that of his mother's. She glanced worriedly through the doorway. Smack! Hassin backhanded her across the face when she failed to answer his questions. Not waiting to see more, Roland broke the door open with his shoulder, bursting into the room and launched himself at Hassin. His wife cried out, "Roland!" Tennock followed right behind, knives flashing in the light of the candle. He immediately engaged the other two men, the same two who had been guarding Roland during the ceremony. They drew their swords, but Tennock dropped one to the floor with a stab in the chest before the blade even left the scabbard. The other guard slashed at Tennock, but he parried the blow with the blade of one knife while striking with the other. The guard dropped back, blood now oozing from his left shoulder. Roland was on the floor, struggling with Hassin for control of the long knife. Curses from the two men filled the house as they rolled back and forth. The guard grabbed a small chair from the floor and used it as a shield as he struck out with his sword. Tennock easily blocked the thrust, but was unable to adequately close with the man as the chair kept him at a distance. He continued exchanging blows when suddenly Roland's wife came up behind the guard and struck him across the back of the head with the long handle of a broom. The man was dazed by the blow, and Tennock easily got within his guard, dropping him to the floor. Tennock turned to the struggling pair on the floor. Neither had been able to gain the advantage over the other. Laying his knife across Hassin's throat, he looked into his eyes and saw him contemplating different courses of action and their consequences. Suddenly, he made his decision and released the grip on the knife. His eyes flicked murderous hate between Tennock and Roland as Roland got to his feet. Roland saw his wife with her baby clutched in her arms, eyes filled with uncertainty and fear, her face red from where Hassin had slapped her. She said something to him, and he went to her, replying in the same language. Giving her a reassuring hug, he spoke to her again, and she nodded a reply as she went and got a satchel which she filled with clothes and other things. Turning back to Tennock, who had a knee on Hassin's chest and held a knife to his throat, asked, "What are we to do with him?" "You know him better than I," replied Tennock, never taking his eyes off his captive. "Should we kill him or not?" At that, Hassin's eyes widened slightly, but gave no other response to what was being said. "I hate to kill someone who was helpless to resist," Roland replied, "even one who tried to kill me." "I have no such qualms about this piece of trash," Tennock said seriously. "Take your family outside and wait for me." He looked intently at Roland, then turned his attention back to Hassin. Roland took the satchel from his wife and then ushered her out the door, closing it behind him. Once his door was shut, Tennock turned his attention back to Hassin and said, Since your people destroyed my city, I have been waiting for my revenge, and the time has come for a part of it. Looking into eyes now filled with fear, where contempt and hate had been, he continued, "This is for my little brother." With a quick motion, he slit Hassan's throat and stared into his eyes as the life slowly left him. Tennant got up and stood back as Hassan jerked in his death throes. Wiping the blade on the dead man's shirt, he said to the now lifeless body, "Thus begins my revenge for the destruction your people have brought to mine." Turning his back to the room filled with death, he went to the door and joined Roland and his family outside. Roland led them around back to the stable where they found 2 horses. Roland saddled them while Tennant kept an eye out. Once saddled, he helped his wife up onto the horse and then handed her the baby. Swinging up onto the other horse, he took her horse's reins. Moving quickly, they made it back to James. "Any trouble?" he asked Tennant. "None worth mentioning," he replied as he mounted his horse. Roland glanced to Tennant but said nothing. The baby cried and his mother bared her breast, defeated as they rode. The town was completely deserted. Everyone had either fled or was in their homes with the door barred. They traveled down the road at a much more relaxed pace than they had on the way to rescue Roland. So it was late in the evening when they arrived back to where Delia and Cassie waited with the wagons. James was relieved to discover they had remained undisturbed. The girls had a fire going, and Cassie was awake as they approached. Once she saw who it was, she woke Delia, saying excitedly, "They're back!" Delia woke, happy at seeing them returned and unharmed, but surprised at the appearance of Roland's wife and son. We couldn't leave them. Tanakh explained, "So we brought them with us." Cassie came to help Roland's wife down from her horse and cooed when she saw the baby. "Can I hold him?" His wife, understanding her request, nodded and handed the baby to her. Cassie took the baby and held it close, going "Goochie, goochie, goo," and other inane childish noises. The baby laughed. Tanakh settled the horses in while the others gathered around the campfire. "I appreciate you rescuing me and all, but why did you do it?" Roland asked. They looked at each other and left it to James to answer. "We did it because we didn't feel it justified for you to be sacrificed in vain." "How would you know it would have been in vain?" James looked at the others and said, "Well, you never know for sure, of course, but we just felt that doing so would be wrong. After all, even your cleric spoke out against it." "True," Roland admitted. "Now, what do you plan to do? Is there elsewhere you can go? Family?" Shaking his head, he said, "I have no family, at least not around here, and Ezra, my wife, her family is back there." He pointed back to the town from which he had just rescued him. At the sound of her name, she smiled at him. "Does she understand what we're saying?" "A little," he replied. "She's been picking up words and phrases from me over the last year. She doesn't speak it too well, but is able to understand most of what is being said." He looked to her and she just smiled and nodded in agreement. Sighing, he said, "I really don't know what we're going to do. I just know we can't go back home, not with all that has happened." He put his arm around Ezra and continued, "Hassan has many powerful friends, and they will be no end of trouble for us, maybe even kill us." "Well, you're welcome to join us," James offered. The others nodded their agreement for the idea. "We don't want to be a burden. We don't wish to be a burden." He said, "But we don't have any other choice. Thank you." A small laugh erupted from the baby where Cassie had him in her lap. Ezra smiled fondly at the sight of Cassie and her son playing together. "Where are you headed?" Roland asked. "Are you traders?" He glanced at James, not really believing that they were, what with the display back at the oasis. "Not exactly," James replied. Then he smiled and said, "Now, just where are my manners? My name is James, and Tanuki here you've already met." Tanuki nodded his head, nodded. Roland returned the gesture. "This is Delia," who gave him a smile, "and the one who's taken over your son is Cassie." Cassie gave him a big smile and said hi. "My name is Roland," he said to the group. "I am originally from Cardry, but for one reason or another ended up here where I met Ezra, the light of my life." He gave her a kiss which caused her to blush slightly. "That little wiggle worm that your Cassie holds is Arky for short." "Arky," cooed Cassie's little baby. "What a cute name." "We're heading south," James explained, "going by way of Khorasan. We have some packages to drop off there, and then we'll see." "Then I think we'll come along," he said. He spoke to Ezra, explaining the situation. She seemed pleased that they would continue to help them. They retrieved Arky and went to settle him in for the night. Delia drew James away from the others and asked, "With what we're headed to, do you think it wise to have them along?" "Probably not," he replied. "But they are better off than they would be if we left them behind, at least for now. Besides, we'll have more of a chance of not standing out if we have others with us, especially someone who speaks the language." "Maybe," she said. "I went over the items we're carrying as well as the delivery orders, and it turns out we're carrying some very high-priced items." She looked at him and continued, "The person who actually owns this may come looking for it." "If so," James said, after contemplating what she just said, "they'll have to find us first." "Maybe we should hire guards?" "Might be a good idea at that. A caravan without guards might look suspicious. We'll see about it at the next town." "That may be wise," she agreed as they made their way back to the group. Ezra and little Archie had already laid down near the fire, and the rest were bedded down as well. James and Delia went to their respective bedrolls. The last thought going through his mind before sleep took him concerned Jerome and how he was doing. Alright, so chapter 10 coming up. We still don't know what's going on with Miko being taken as a slave into the Empire, but now they got Roland, Ezra, and Archie, who, if you've read it before, you know that they were with them for quite a while. In fact, Roland plays a key thing later on. So yeah, so we got a few more people. Now they're talking about guards, and Delia wants to get a regular caravan going, it seems like. Anyway, that's chapter 9. Okay, so chapter 10 tomorrow. It's Tuesday, Spaghetti Day. Went to town yesterday. We got our favorite French bread at Walmart, the $1 French bread. My boy loves it, and so whenever we're in town and get the bread, we always have spaghetti the next day. And yeah, it's going to be in the 90s for the foreseeable future. And just after the 4th of July, hundreds. Yeah. So it'll be warm here in the Southwest. I kind of like it though. So chapter 10 tomorrow. We'll talk to you later. Y'all have a good day.